All right, other memory. Patience has this one rated at 38. I have it at 42, and BlackShadow has it at 55. So, who wants to start this one?
Yeah, I'll go. I think for me, this was again looking at all the bennies. This was near the top of the Benny list for me. Obviously, Seach Reverend Mother and Grandma, whatever Grandma's actual name is, Reverend Mother
Mohiam.
Mahaim.
Behind.
Obviously, they,
Grandma. What?
Grandma
you
Mohiam.
know, that's what. There's a player who used to be really active in the online community, Lux. I think it was Lux who called her Grandma, and that just stuck for me.
Yeah, he has some nicknames for all of the cards and all the characters.
What, Gurney's granddad?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But other memory, it's a combination for me of the access and the card draw, and
Hmm.
the fact that you always got two persuasion. It's just a well-rounded card. Let me put it
Agreed.
that way.
Yeah, I agree. I
I think my rating is probably a little low looking at it. I probably was a little harsh against this. Like just statistically, like it's reasonably solid. The fact that this, yeah, I probably should have rated this a little bit higher looking at this. Full cost is a little bit, nothing too outrageous, but
Mhm.
even its base effect of drawing a card can't be bad. Its access is a little limited, I think, is the issue of other memory. Only
Mhm.
has city access or mining, which is a little bit hindering in kind of allowing to do what you want to do. It has two reveal, which is obviously pretty good, but obviously the big effect of other memory is the fact that you can draw Bene Gesserit cards from your discard. That's obviously the
Yeah,
big drawing
yeah,
factor, and
yeah.
pairing this with like a really strong card, like Mother Mahayam, or even the heady heights of Kwisatz and Lady Jessica.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I've actually rarely got that to work, so I almost don't even count that in the range. It's so niche that you can both get the cards you need, get the combo to happen at a specific moment. Like it may
Hmm.
happen once in a game where
Yeah,
you get the Kwisatz and other memory and another Benny to trigger it.
yeah.
So
There are two problems with this. Like on paper, it looks really good. The issues is that you almost need a bit of a chunky deck to actually make more use out of it.
Yeah.
Because if you've only got like say like I saw once someone had like Jessica and Kwisatz and other memory, which obviously looks absurd, but they had like a 7-8 card deck. So other memory is actually not really doing anything because you're never having these cards in your discard pile, so that effect's completely neutered.
I think that was
The
a tournament game you commented on, eh?
Yes,
That
it was one of the tourney games. Yeah, the
I
deck
watched that.
it was really crazy, like this
Yeah.
deck, but it was actually so small. Like, other memory actually wasn't even doing anything.
Hmm.
It was kind of bizarre. The only other issue with other memory, is that especially with like Mahayam, which obviously looks really strong, that you can obviously pair that together. The problem is that if it's in your discard and you pull it, everyone knows that you've got it.
Sure. Yeah.
That's pretty important. So, in that situation, like if I see that's going, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go research station. And that just like largely, I mean, it's still costing you water, of course, that's a problem, but that does largely neuter the effects they had behind, for example. Now obviously you could say that it has the ability to do things and make you do moves you wouldn't do otherwise, which obviously has its own value. But the fact that you know what card's been drawn can cater some people to kind of like it will influence what they do, knowing that that's probably coming, if not next, then the turn after anyway. So I think it's a nice effect, but I don't think it's actually as good as it looks. Of course,
Yes.
if it's Kwisatz, it's like who the hell cares?
Well, I think you can do better than Kwisatz, actually. I think so. Other memory is rated. So on paper, it's a slightly better reveal Bene Gesserit Initiate. Right. It draws you a card. It's worth 2 persuasion instead of 1, but it costs 4 instead of 3. It's a slightly chunkier Bene
And no
Gesserit.
count access.
And yeah, exactly. And they're missing some access. However, this card's effect is so powerful when you can get it to work with some of the upper echelon of those Bene Gesserit cards, and we haven't even mentioned Web of Power. We haven't even
No.
Hmm.
mentioned In the Shadows, which are both Bene Gesserit cards, which you can trigger. Then you can buy back if you have like a hollow projectors or just the Truthsayer. Truthsayer combo is great with other memory. So you could
Mm.
Truthsayer trigger your In the Shadows, then other memory buy it back. It's kind of insane. It's kind of insane. The things you can do with this card. Again, very much agree with BlackShadow though that this is contingent on having that deck work right. You have to have a slightly larger deck, which if you're doing that, you're probably not doing so well. I mean, not always. You can win with a larger deck, but it's a little bit more unwieldy. You're likely just a moment ago before we started recording, I had a game where I had a huge deck and I just got tons of bad draws. Like it was awful. I never got a chance to trash any card out of my deck. It happens, and my other memory wouldn't have saved me there even. So, yeah, I like it. It can high roll. This is a card that can high roll very, very high.
But it can also low roll very, very low.
But it's also just a good thing to draw. It's just good to draw extra cards, and I think there's nothing wrong with its agent ability as a draw card.
No, just to draw the card can't be too bad. But the problem is you kind of want to use it to like get more use out of the really strong Bene cards. And even if you've got them, what do you do if you draw other memory at like beginning of like a card shuffle and your good Bene cards are at the back end?
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do. Like it happens, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. You can't really control it. And it's just shrug. There's not a lot you can do about it. So you are definitely reliant on like your cards coming out in a good order for you to maximize it, which you cannot. You basically almost can't influence without putting in a lot of cost.
I agree with that. I also want to say that this card, like many of those other cards that have similar access, with the blue circle, this goes up in value if you're Helena, because you're never blocked. You can always use it.
Yep.
And Helena also can get those cards you need in your deck. So there's a lot. There are good plays with this card. I think it's very strong if you can get it to work, and it's just like good. Otherwise, you're never really sad for the 2 persuasion. So I'd never be sad buying other memory, to be honest.
No, that's good. I'm on board. I kind of made my case at the beginning. I just think it's an all around good card, and I think I might have ranked it higher early days when I thought you could get that agent effect happen more often. So I've chilled out on it a bit, but I just think it's so solid with the 2 persuasion, with the draw card. And then if you can really make it work once or twice a game, then bonus. Great.
Yeah.
Yep. It's a good point actually about like our experiences of the card, making us realize it's actually harder to trigger than it looks. Like, because you wouldn't think that on paper. You'd think, oh, okay, I mean, this looks pretty straightforward, but actually getting it to work like that is a lot harder in practice than you'd actually imagine, which is worth noting. Maybe we're just really bad. I don't know.
It could be. Our next card is Court Intrigue at 46. And this one we're going to have to talk about. So I have it ranked at 21, which is probably a little high. BlackShadow has it in the middle at 50, and Patience down at 63.
Yeah. Mine, I think, is probably too low. But yeah, we're all over the job with this.
We're all over the place. Honestly, I think around 45 is probably where it should be anyway. But
question mark?
I have question mark. So let me start. So I have it at 21, and for it to be like just outside the top cards in the game, it has to do something really special. So it honestly doesn't do that much. The thing is, Court Intrigue gives you 1 persuasion and 1 dagger, I believe, and it also gives you only access to the Emperor track. But it is a infiltrate card, so you can always go there. I personally love these cards. The infiltrate cards I all would take over anything else, and in fact, I think that for some reason, we were looking at Bounty Hunter. For some reason, I have the Bounty Hunter rated really low, and I think that's just a mistake. But Court Intrigue, I like this one a lot. The reason I like this one is because there's many, many, many times where you're going to be drawing intrigue cards that just don't do anything with you. And I value intrigue cards pretty highly. And so I generally try to get as many as possible. Court Intrigue, for me, smooths out those intrigue cards and helps me get something I could use. The infiltrate is nice always, but generally speaking, it's just, it's a trip for $2. That's fine. So I really like this one just because the cycling out of intrigue cards, it's a very unique effect. There's only 2 effects in the game that do this, and one of them is on a tech called Sonic Snoopers. The other one is this. So I think I value that highly, and I'm not sad that it's at 21 for me, but it's probably a little high. It probably should be around 30 or something. But it's that effect is powerful if used well. So that's my defense of that card.
I think my very low ranking of this really reflects my aversion to the Emperor spaces. And I know I've heard you guys, in particular, talking in your game commentary about the top Emperor track space, which I don't even know the name of because I go there so
Conspire.
rarely.
Inspire.
Inspire. Like I am one of the people who undervalues that space. I probably could count the number of times I've gone there in well over 100 games of Dune Imperium on one or two hands at most.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I do go there. I do like it. It's
It's
sometimes
not.
the
It's
only
not.
way. Sorry, go ahead.
To be fair, it's a space that has gone down in popularity a lot since the expansion. To be fair, I wouldn't even say it was that heavily used, even in the base game. Like it was a bit.
That's
It was
weird.
a nice way. It was a nice alternative way to cash in your spice for cash. If say charm shipping was blocked, you could go
Mm-hmm.
into there instead, and had a bit of cool flexibility. Obviously get some bonuses to that. But I do understand what you mean. Carry
Yeah.
Well, so then in court intrigue for me just becomes because I don't probably give enough like even attention or to the possibility of going to Conspire, which is my bad for just not being used to going there and not even thinking of it. Then it's really mostly for me it's two Solari, infiltrating for two Solari, and that of course the spot. Granted, there have been times I've grabbed this just to start cycling a couple of bad intrigues out of my deck, so I
Mm-hmm.
agree with
Mm-hmm.
that. I guess because the intrigue deck is so strong, there aren't very many of those. So diversion. Okay, great. Give me court intrigue.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah,
yeah.
that's fair. But there are enough where you're like, I'm never gonna complete this. Like I'm going combat. Why did I have to draw, like, plans within plans or court of the market? Those are fine to have, and that it's at the bottom of the deck. You don't have to worry about those sorts of things. But then, like we've all drawn those cards that are contingent on having the High Council, and you just don't have it and might not get it, or you know, again, like, yeah, putting troops into the combat, something like that, or maybe you just don't want combat cards. That's possible. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's just better to just cash in your intrigue cards instead of bothering to cycle them. But I've been in enough situations where I'd want to that I kind of give this one a pass for that.
I forget. You said it at the beginning. Is it one
about
persuasion and one sword?
One precision and one sword. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. If it had two persuasion, this would be a dynamite card.
yeah, I agree.
I've talked about this card. It's come up a few times in like game commentaries. I quite like this card. Obviously the fact you can cycle intrigue is very cool. And that's a nice way of kind of tailoring what you get for kind of what's more going to suit you. And obviously just having intrigues in your hand always makes you harder to play against inherently. As I've said before, you could have like the three worst intrigues in the game in your hand, but purely the fact that you've got three intrigues in your hand makes you more difficult to play against because no one knows that you've got the worst ones in your hand. You could have all sorts of rubbish going there, but you could have whatever, but you still got them, and so it's a nice way to kind of cycle up when you're not getting particularly good intrigues. Obviously, it's luck based; like you can't control what you're gonna get, so that is a problem. I think the question is how well does core intrigue actually synergize with going to the Emperor in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is an often missed point about this. I think personally, outside of say the first couple of turns, going well just isn't generally that great. I think we
Right.
can largely agree to this.
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously going there early. Now, if you're like ECAS and you want to like go there and then pay Ment out in your first turn, so you can still get your card trash and do stuff, fine. If you want to get it to try and supplement getting hold of Swordmaster first couple of turns, fine. But outside of that, going to the Emperor spaces isn't actually all that great. It's usually the track that's going to get boosted most by other effects, be it like
Mm-hmm.
Leto's ring ability,
Yeah.
going shipping, that sort of thing, because the spaces themselves aren't amazing. I think Conspire is totally solid, and I do think a lot of people really underrate it. Especially now that troops are harder to kind of get hold of in the early game. Spending 4 spice to go there for 5 Solari, 2 troops and an intrigue, like in the first couple of turns, is very, very good. It makes you kind of difficult to play against, I think. Um, and I just think that core intrigue inherently makes going to either of those spaces better if you have an intrigue on you that you just don't really like. You've gone to Carthag early, for example, and you get like a card that's just it's just not going to be of much use to you, and you're just
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't really want this.
Mm-hmm.
Core intrigue just gives you that extra bit of value for actually going to those spaces in the first place. to allow you to kind of make it feel a bit more justified to go there, because you're basically going to wealth and you're getting to Solari and an intrigue. And then suddenly that's not bad value, you know. Like if that was just its base effect to Solari and an intrigue, people would go there a lot more often than they do.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case there. The only other thing I will also add to Court Intrigue is it is a very sneaky way of like trying to steal Emperor alliances,
Yeah. Yeah.
because obviously you can't be blocked. And the Emperor typically is probably the least fought for alliance in the game now. Typically, like if someone kind of rushes up to like 3 or 4 spots, it's not often they get challenged unless there's like a Tesia in the game, or suddenly a load of power plays and treacheries comes out and people just try stuff. So having Court Intrigue is a nice setup way to kind of interfere and steal that alliance, and that you can't really block. You know, you compare that up with, say, going shipping, for example. And even if someone else goes wealth, like you still can't be blocked because you can always go there. Like there's no cost. So there's a nice little side bonus for that.
This card does well. I have one more thing to say. One more thing to add. I think this card benefits one leader the most, and I think it benefits the Baron the most. The Baron gets benefit from this because they usually have excess intrigue cards just due to their ring ability. And I do play Baron a lot. I like Baron a lot. That might be coloring a little bit of my positive feedback from this card, is that I usually get good value from it when I'm playing Baron.
Fair. I play a lot of Beast, and I also think this card works quite well with Beast.
Sure.
Because the alliance ability is obviously good for him to get those troops in, but as Beast, you're going to be doing a lot of fighting. If you're going to be doing a lot of fighting, odds are you're going to be visiting Carthag a bit, and obviously you're going to be getting those intrigues. So this card can synergize well with that.
Okay, Imperial Bashar. I know that this one's kind of interesting for us because we all have, again, these two cards all over the place. I've ranked this one 62. Patience has it 42, and BlackShadow at 29. So this just shows that we've all had varying experiences with these two cards, for instance.
Well, this is a weird one for me because I actually don't particularly like this card. Which I know sounds strange. I've ranked it 29. Yeah, I don't particularly like the card. I don't have to like the card, I don't think, to respect that it has some real potential value and danger with, like, you know, if, especially as a combative, usually a fairly combative player doing a lot of fighting, Bashar, like, is particularly dangerous. You know, and also as a player who has a habit of not trashing their deck very often, Bashar also helps with that. So in regards to like how I tend to play, it falls in line with me fairly well. But I do think this card can be a bit overvalued. It can be a little bit tricky to use if you're not careful. It obviously only has city access, which again, as I mentioned, is a problem.
Yeah.
And kind of forcing you to use it early, which is not ideal because obviously you're trashing cards. Like, you don't necessarily want to be putting something down first so you can trash it later on, like a dagger or whatever else, rather than trash it direct from your hand. It's not ideal. The cube ability isn't great when there's a lot of other cards that give you that ability. I mean, if you want to go get the cube ability, just get hold of like Recruiter and call it a day. You know, it's half the cost. The real question is the reveal ability, and how good is it? The 2 swords and an extra sword for every other revealed card that has a sword. Like, how good is that is the question, because that's what I think where the meat of this card really comes in.
Well, I mean, I'm surprised that you aren't a fan of it, being somebody who plays the Beast so often. I would assume you would have the best take on that. I mean, that's...
Yeah, I know, it's bizarre, isn't it? Like, I respect that I think it's good, and like late game, if you're going a real sword heavy deck, like this can be like a like something that tips the scales. You know, if you just fill your deck with loads of like 1 sword cards, maybe a couple like Weirding Ways, Spice Traders, maybe if you don't use it, Chris Knives, that sort of thing, Desert Ambush, you know, like you can get a ton of value out of it, you know, and pairing that with artillery as well, Imperial Bashar can be ridiculous. But I do think that it's a bit of a dangerous card to use sometimes, and it's easy, I think, to not use this card for what its value can be. I think it can be very heavily misused, I think is the only danger, and I'm sure CJ will talk more about that.
Yeah. What I want to say about this card is I think 2 things. One, I think that it has, on paper, a pretty cool effect. The reveal can high roll really good. This is a card that you can just like luck into drawing the cards you need. or maybe you're playing a Kaz and you've built that perfect deck. It's possible. This card is also entirely dependent on the Imperium row. Because we don't have a reserve card that also has a dagger, I think this card is almost to the point where it's a trap. Where you buy it, you have to commit early. I'm going to go for combat. Then you're putting a bunch of crappy cards in your deck, and everyone else is just getting ahead by buying the good cards. Like, that doesn't feel good. You also kind of have to keep your daggers in your deck. You don't have to. You could do whatever you want, but it benefits you to keep at least one dagger or two daggers in your deck, which doesn't really synergize with what you're trying to do anyway, which is the combat spaces. So what you're doing by buying cards that give you limited access is you're keeping cards with limited access in your deck. You have to have some other things that are good enough to make this card worth your time. I just have never had that experience, and so this is going to be a very experiential kind of rating, because every time I bought this card, the only thing I end up able to use it for is its trash ability. And if you're using it for its cube ability, its troop ability, it's no better than an Arrakis recruiter that just costs extra. So I don't know. I don't like this card at all, and I don't even respect it. I think it's really bad. And the one time I've seen it actually high roll, that player was winning the game anyway. And so I felt like it's a win more card, or it's just a doesn't do anything card. That's how I feel about it.
If you're in a good spot, like this card can like really help you get over the line and kind of like help cement it. To be fair, the trash ability is kind of like, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with having a card that trashes. Like, that just cannot be a bad thing to be able to do that. Like, it's never bad. To be fair, I think where this card really, really does well is like if you compare this with like as a dispatched envoy. Like, this card could be a lot of fun, you know, like sending Imperial Bashar to, like, say, Hardy Warriors, or, is a lot of fun, just to throw in a ton of troops out of nowhere, or go Imperial Bashar, and even do something, go crazy and go Bashar and send him to, like, selective breeding, do a double trash, stuff like that. You could do a lot of funky stuff with Imperial Bashar.
Sure. I mean, but you can do that with any card and that intrigue card, and for the record, I agree. There are a lot of really cool things you can do with that intrigue card, but this card is only marginally better than Fatican Death Commando for me, and Arrakis Recruiter, which I kind of keep all together. These kind of like middling combat trashy like get troop cards. I think they're fine. Like, there's definitely a place for an Imperial Bashar in your deck, but I think that if you're trying to high roll with it, like, that forces you into some really awkward early decisions that can lead to you just straight up not getting what you want later on. I don't like it that it just has a single access.
Just city access is
just
a real
terrible.
Problem. Again, it's like, as a Helena, like, you're fine with that, but for anyone else, that is a problem.
Yeah, for me, I mean, just as a rating like comparison, Duncan Idaho is higher for me because the water reveal is just better in my view, and leads to more economic pressure on you from other people, like basically forcing them to cut you off or do things. It can do more getting a water than just getting more power. Now again, saying there's definitely times when this card is going to win you a combat, where things are going to align and you have enough swords in your deck to make it work. Every time I've tried it, I've been disappointed.
Spice Smuggler.
Yeah. All right, let's move along. We have this one. Patience has this one at 36. I have it at 47 and 49 for BlackShadow. So pretty close, not too bad. Spice Smugglers, tell us why this is a good card, Patience.
Well, I think it's because I tend to, again, value the tracks, and sorry, I have to remind myself. This was the one where if you have,
you pay two
influence.
You pay two.
Is it pay two spice? Yeah.
Get an influence on the guild track, right?
Get an influence on the guild and get one bump with the guild. That's Spice Smugglers.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. Wrong one. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong.
That's
sorry,
Spice Trader.
Yeah, get it. They get confused.
Start all over again. Cut that. Cut.
Yeah. They get confused for me too. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's to bump on the guild track. I think that there are many different cards that give bumps. I like the guild alliance. I like getting the 3
Hmm.
Solari from it in the sort of round 3, round 4-ish. So an early Spice Smuggler is where it's at. The later the game, mid game, this isn't a card that I'm taking, generally
Yeah,
speaking,
yeah.
unless I'm in a fight for the guild alliance and I have the guild ambassador as well or something like that.
I don't disagree with anything that you said there. I think it's, if you can trigger it to go up on the tracks, it's very strong. Um, yeah, I kind of keep it in the middle. I think this is just like a good card. I'll take it if I get it early. If I get it late, I'll sleeve it. So it's middle of the road for me.
The real issue is having the spice and then getting access to the city in order to use it. I think that's the problem, and getting that early game is kind of tricky. Unless you can pair it up with, like, say, winning an initial combat for like some spice. Like if you get like raid stockpiles, like turn 2, and you win that for free spice, and
Mm-hmm.
you've got this, that's pretty nice,
Sure.
especially if you say you're third or fourth in the turn order, and you can pretty much guarantee getting to a city and getting the hit in. Where of course, being that far back in the row, you're not going to be able to get to fold space, particularly because people are just getting there to you first. So it could be a nice way to try and supplement that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an outrageous play to consider, say, going like, trying to go like steel suits, ransom, the great flat, and then try and make the pick up for the spice, when then look to use obviously to get there. And the extra Solari isn't bad, free Solari is okay for the early game, but I do think this card is a little tricky to use sometimes. And like, as you say, yeah, once you hit sort of like the mid game, like this generally isn't a lot of use to you, unless you're trying to find some real unconventional way to try and steal the spacing alliance from someone, in which case this might help you. But I think for 2 spice for the bump and free Solari, I don't think is ultimately the greatest return. Especially, it is once you hit mid game. I just don't think it's that amazing. But
Yeah,
early game, this can get you to, like, instead of shipping earlier than you would expect normally, and that can be pretty cool.
yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I think that if you get it early, this card can be really strong. And because of the scarcity of Solari early, any card that generates Solari, I think to help your economy get going, so you can buy your Swordmaster and your High Council and Dreadnoughts if you really want, if you're just flush with cash. I think there's a lot to be said for this card. I think it's good. I think I might undervalue this card slightly, but I think it's a middle of the road card. You definitely have to have it under the right circumstances for it to get the best value.
It does pair, admittedly, very well with Appropriate, which is a card we're not a million miles away from
Mm,
talking about. Obviously, that is a potentially hugely, hugely dangerous combination, having both of those. So,
yeah. Or if you're Yuna, I mean, just anything that gives you
Una,
extra
of course,
Solari.
yeah. Two, although I'd say even Una, 2 spice for 4 Solari.
It's pretty
Like
good.
it's and a bump. It's not a million miles away from like a local fence at that point, really.
Yeah, exactly. I'd say it's better than a local fence, actually.
I mean, probably, yeah, for the bump. Like, you can push the alliance. I think especially when it comes to Space and Guild Alliance, you tend to find like people will rush to 2, and then one person, like whoever gets shipping first, will generally just rush the Space and Guild Alliance, and then kind of hope that no one challenges them there, so they can focus
Yes.
on other stuff.
Yeah.
Because of course it's kind of awkward to chase it, because you don't really want to go into fold space loads, because it's a long term sort of space. Given the fold space later on, there's no immediate real benefit. So this can be a way of kind of putting on a bit of like surrogate pressure, sort of outside of going shipping yourself and doing that and pressuring them, which you don't really want to do because you got other stuff you want to do there. So this can be a nice way to kind of make things awkward for people that are just trying to hold on to that, especially if they've got like other guild cards that require the alliance, like Ambassador and such.
All right, we're on to Weirding Way. Weirding Way is kind of a interesting card. Patience has
I
this one
am so
rated
sad. I'm so sad you guys have this solo. I got it
solo.
here. I'm so sad.
It's at 26 for you. It is at 46 for BlackShadow, and I have it at 58. Yeah,
So sad.
I don't like this card very much. I think it's okay. I had a friend who used to say that I was gonna love this card, that it was gonna be my favorite card, and it hasn't been that. I like it, it's fine. I'll play it, but it's not my favorite.
I mean, well, obviously, Weeding Way is a very unique card in the fact it lets you take 2 turns,
Yeah.
and there's nothing else in the game that can do that. that is inherently both cool and also like allows you to do things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise because of just the way the game works. There has to be intrinsic value of this. And to be fair, it's also not actually got the worst reveal effect of two swords because I think typically with Weirding Way, if you take this, you're generally going somewhat combative just because of the way the double. You're not really going Weirding Way to like get a spice must flow. Typically, you're generally getting involved in some fighting, so there's some inherent value there.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that this is a bit awkward to use early game. I think it's one of the ones where you absolutely need to have Swordmaster or Mentat to really use this properly. Because I just think obviously the issue is because you're using two agent turns in one, it means that you're inherently going to be revealing sooner before anyone else. And which means if you are fighting, you have to kind of get in your forces sooner, and then that, in theory, other people can kind of play a little more correctly against you. Sometimes it's a little funky like that. I think it's the only thing. But yeah, obviously it lets you do a lot of cool stuff. Being able to like go to great flat, and then you can then go straight to tech negotiation before someone blocks you. You could go interstellar shipping and then smuggling, and just completely shut that off for a turn if you want to.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of things you can do with this card, which you just cannot do with anything else. So
Exactly. And I think, we don't, I don't think there's, that's really, it's those combos that is what this card's all about. So whether it's interstellar shipping and then go grab that Mentat after you've been the first one there, or obviously interstellar shipping is one of the most obvious starting plays, and then do something else that you feel you want to do, but you can't do because if you don't grab interstellar shipping, somebody else is going to grab it. So
Right.
that's one of its primary uses. But there's also grabbing spice and then doing something with that spice. And that's really the other clutch move, I think. So whether you're grabbing spice for that tech or you're grabbing spice and then getting Highliner when somebody else had the spice, like those are killer moves. Like I actually love this card.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's a very good card. I don't think I have it that high. I don't know why I put it down here. Honestly, I think it's fine. I guess I just maybe it's just me being a naysayer saying I just don't like that you can just abuse the shipping track with this card. I think that's potentially like not fun, and so I kind of just rated it down, I guess. But you're right. It is a very powerful card, and it's probably deserves to be up in the 30s. So,
Like,
There are
and we,
some leaders who
sorry.
use this better than others. Again, coming from like a pool experience, like this can be a way of kind of like effectively having a 6 card deck without actually having it.
6 card
Because of
hand.
course you can always use Weirding Way to take yourself to Arakeen if you have your card on top of your deck and you really really want it for something. You can use Weirding Way to go to Arakeen. You can draw it and then play it immediately for whatever you initially wanted to play with it in the first place. So
Mm,
it's a bit of a nichey way to use it, I suppose, and probably not the most effective, but it's playing a fair bit of pool. Like it has some extra use there
It's
to do that.
interesting.
I don't think you really want to be visiting cities with this first, typically, unless maybe like to research station, perhaps. I mean, obviously the dream of going research station and interstellar shipping with this, like late game, obviously is like kind of it's definitely up there.
yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like you are obviously a bit restricted on what other cards you draw. If you've got a bit of a bloated deck, the value of this card is ultimately going to go down somewhat. You kind of need a bit more of a fine-tuned deck with access, with
Mm-hmm.
abilities, to kind of really use this. Obviously, Weirding Away also has Bene Gesserit abilities. Like this with Mother Mahim is kind of really a little bit unfair
Yeah, I agree.
because obviously the 2 card discard and there's nothing anyone can do about it. They just basically can't stop you from doing it,
Yep.
and there's no way to prepare for it either. So that
Yeah.
can be pretty cruel. But you have to get both of them realistically as well, though. So
Yeah,
I
I've
would
seen.
say this is a for me this card is super important as a it's a potentiator, it's a supplementary, it's like a complementary card to other things in your deck. Like you said, it's almost all cards are better in a tighter deck. This really shines there, and what it allows you to do is just do that thing that you want to do first, whether before anybody else does, whether it's research station or interstellar shipping, and then do the other thing that's important to you this round.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And and then maybe that's again getting the spice that you need to go to Highliner before the other people can do it when they're sitting there already with 6 spice. So I really this is one of the first times where I think you guys have ranked something a lot lower than me where I wouldn't budge on it. Like I really highly value this
That's
card.
fair. Yeah.
I will say this could be a very tricky card for Ekaz, who can of course get this with his ring. He can buy it that way. Can make him very, very tricky to play if he can
Mm.
get some other cards that go well with this. So there is definitely that. But again, I also don't play a lot of Ekaz, so like that probably affects it a little bit. Like I've probably rated this a little bit low. I think it's definitely a funky card and lets you do some cool stuff. But I don't know. I wouldn't go out of my way to get hold of this.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's okay. And you're probably right, Patience, that it deserves more because it does have a lot of play. It's a flexible card, more or less. And it does let you jump the turn order in an interesting way, which has a lot of benefits. So yeah, I like that. I've been on the other side of this card where I've been playing it to go into combat, but unless you have a way to like go to Mentat to like even out your turns, you end up with playing early, revealing early, and then people can take they can steal the combat from you,
Yeah,
which is possible.
they just play more against you. That is the
Yeah,
one. For a combat card, it can actually hinder you sometimes if you're not careful.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, it does mean like if you're like say it's turn 7, turn 8, these turn 3 combats, and you're first to act, and you've got Weirding Way, it makes using this kind of awkward if you can't get access to Mentap, like you don't have any cash, for example.
Hmm.
Uh, can make things really awkward because you're having to declare and reveal so early that people know kind of what you've got, and that's pretty uncomfortable.
Agreed. All right, shall we move along? Sardaukar
Mm.
Legion. This is interesting. Patience, you have this one way down at
Yes.
54. That's actually surprising. 45 for BlackShadow. I have it at 31. I quite like this card. I guess I'll start. So yeah, the Legion. I mean, the Legion has been a good card since the base game. I think it's better in this like meta and in this expansion because of the scarcity of troops, and it gets you a couple of really interesting things. So it gets you to Mentat if you need it. The Emperor, is whatever, but it's fine. If you go up to Conspire, that's 4 troops. That's pretty nice. And it can go up to the of course tech area at Ix. That's all fine. But the strongest effect of this card is revealing it for 3 more troops in your garrison, which is the 6 combat, which is as strong as a worm riders
Mhm.
without adding any extra daggers from your hand, of course, or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, I really like this card. I take it high. I take it highly if I'm going to go anything like, even if I'm not going combat, this can let me snipe a combat from people.
One of the odd things I think that there is to Sardaukar Legion, I don't see as many cards, is I actually reckon one of the Sardaukar Legion's best like synergy cards is actually the other Sardaukar Legion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is really bizarre. 'Cause there's not many cards that you'd want 2 of in your deck, like really ever. Obviously, there's not many you can get 2 of, but Sardaukar Legion is actually probably one where having 2 in your deck, like, because you can always use one for getting your troops in, and you have one just to send them in without having to go anywhere. Like that's pretty darn nice. And of course, the problem with going to cities, like cities obviously let you deploy your troops, but it does take you away from sometimes more other things you like to do. Like obviously, if you want to like be racing alliances, for example, Sardaukar Legion could be a very nice way to kind of allow you to focus on the tracks and focus on the Emperor, focus on whatever else, the Fremen especially, and just let this do the deploying for you. And always having these in your deck just makes you tricky to play against because people don't know necessarily if you've got it. And it means if someone is gonna commit for like a turn 4, turn 5 combat, they kind of have to guess if you've got it or not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And ultimately, it's mean that people are gonna like if they'd normally send in maybe like 5 troops to win a combat. If you've got a fairly stacked garrison, they're going to feel compelled to get in more because they don't know if you got it, and so they're going to end up overcommitting to fights, which you can then just decide. Even if you've got Legion, be like, I don't want any part of this, and just leave it be. Put in 1 troop for like a 3rd place and call it a day.
Yeah.
So there's definite value there. The troops are harder to get to, definitely, but the fact that it has only like there's not many places it can go is a problem. there's only two spots in the game it can go without some kind of cost. So you have to have some resources in hand to make the most use of this. Like if you're running pretty bare minimum on your economy, Sarkar Legion can be really awkward to use effectively. I think is the problem. You need to like have some starting. You gotta spend some money to make some money. I
Sure.
think that's the only downside of the Legion.
Let me. I don't want to get too bogged down on this one. I have it lower, and I think I don't have anything against this card. It's just, and let me introduce like a new concept here to explain myself. If you're buying on average 3 to 5 cards to add to your deck in the game, if you're going to keep your deck relatively manageable, this is a 5 cost card. And really, you're only usually going to have out of those 3 to 5 cards you're adding, you're really only going to have 1, 2, maybe 3 5 cost or more cards. So if this is one of my 1 or 2 or maybe 3 5 cost or more cards, then I think I've got a weak deck because there's
Yeah,
just so many more high cost cards
yeah, it
that are
is.
that
It
are
is
better.
expensive. I think. It's kind of weird in the base game. Like five, it's kind of weird. If 5 costs in the base game I think probably ish about right. I guess sometimes, but now because obviously the value of the Imperium row is just greater in this game because there's so many good cards that came with the X expansion. It does feel a little pricey now. That
Hmm.
is a problem.
A little bit, maybe. I don't know. I still think it's pretty strong. It also synergizes very well with the shipping track, so you don't have to worry that you can't ship and then not deploy your troops. You know, it kind of like does troop transports for you, and you don't have to buy troop transports or have bother with that. That's one of my least favorite techs. As that, I think that this does that, but just better. Um,
Yeah, that's fair.
yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know.
that's a good point. That's a good point.
It's a good reveal effect. It's a pretty decent agent effect. Its access is a bit awkward if you don't have resources to start with. Like I would never feel bad about getting Sardaukar Legion. I'd never put it and feel like, oh, I really shouldn't have got that. You can always find some use out of it somewhere.
Mhm.
And if you go for a whole game and you've not really made any use out of Sardaukar Legion, you've probably not had a good game. Being
That's
brutally
fair.
honest, so
Yeah.
you should find some use out of the summer, even if you just use it to go Mentat and just garrison those 2 extra troops. Like those will add up over time.
All right, let's move on to Spice Trader. Spice Trader is actually tied with Sardaukar Legion. Spice Trader. So this one's kind of weird. It's one of the new cards from Ix. It has a 2 influence in Fremen requirement to discard a card to gain 2 spice. It reveals for 2 persuasion and has a dagger. It goes to cities and deserts, and so this one's weird. What do you guys think of this one?
2 persuasion is good.
Yep, yep,
uh, and I think, just in light of this whole conversation we've been having around unload synergy, it's got that going on. 2 spice is always good. I rank it a little lower than this ranking, but I think, yeah, I'm okay with it.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it's solid. It's a good way of powering if you're trying to go tech heavy. It's a good way of finding some extra spice elsewhere. It's a great way of looking to go highliners and ambush people with that. You can get definitely an extra trip out of that there. It's a Fremen card. There's
yep.
lots of Fremen bonds in the game, so there's that. You can use it for its agent action. Its reveal ability is totally solid. Yeah, I don't think there's anything on this card at all. This is a very good card for like the Baron, because obviously the Baron can basically get to 2 influence of Fremen basically whenever he wants.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Agreed.
this in the Baron's hand, I think, is a very, very powerful card. To other people, not so much. And obviously, again, trying to get those unload effects to try and make the maximum use out of your Spice Trader is needed. But even if you're just using it to discard like Dune or Reconnaissance, discarding that for 2 spice
Yeah,
is got to be worth it.
yeah.
That adds up. You can do that like 3 times a game. That's 6 spice. That's not bad at all. You can do a lot of stuff with 6 spice. So, yeah, I think this has a lot of use. You can even discard it, and then the card you've discarded uses a trash for like selective breeding, stuff like that. It's just getting to the 2 influence is a little tricky sometimes.
It's not
Unless
too
you're Baron, who
hard.
can just go there straight away. Or you could decide to like even first turn go for like the steel suits Hardy Warriors double play
Mhm.
and get straight there, which I do sometimes. That can be a little tricky for players. So I think this is a card like again like I would never feel bad picking up Spice Trader. And even again, if you don't use its raising effect, its reveal is totally fine.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I don't have any problems with this card. I rated it about the same as the Truthsayer because they're enablers. I think this one's slightly better than Truthsayer, even though I like drawing cards, is because this synergizes well with desert spaces. You go to a desert space, you get some spice, you discard a card, you get more spice. People might not see that coming. That's potentially a big game for Highliner or Tech. I like it. I just like it. I know that sometimes this is awkward if you don't have like a dagger or something to discard because you late game it's weird because you want to discard a card for the spice, but then you need the cards in hand for the persuasion, and sometimes that doesn't work out. But so for that reason, it's a little lower than like other memory for me. But I think that this is a very solid card.
This with Freighter Fleet makes your city trips very dangerous.
Oh yes, oh yes,
very dangerous. But like observant players will sometimes spot that it's coming, and they will perhaps play around that a little bit. So you gotta be a little bit careful there. You gotta have some tricks up your sleeve as Spice Trader to really get like the absolute max out of it. But even if you don't, it's totally fine.
All right, Test of Humanity has a solid 43 average rank, so it's a little bit higher in our ranking from its average, but that's fine. Patience, why don't you tell us a little about Test of Humanity, why you like it, why you don't like it?
Yeah, I've got it right around the middle of the road for the Bene Gesserit 3/4 cost cards. Its agent effect is strong. Forcing somebody to discard a card or a garrison troop, or is it a troop in the conflict?
Deployed troop.
Deployed troop.
Not being deployed, so no one deployed, they must discard a card.
It's not killer or anything, but it's good. It's a workhorse. It's got the 2 persuasion. It's a workhorse Benny card for me. I've got it a bit lower than this, but like I said, I've got it above the Sister and the Initiate, but below Siege Reverend Mother and Other Memory. Yeah.
The weird thing with this card is it can be, and it's a little ironic, I suppose, with the X expansion, but it can be a touch bit of a poison chalice now, purely because unload features exist.
Yeah.
That is the big weakness. Like in the base game, this was totally solid because like making your opponents discard cards was always good because it means they're obviously not having swords for combat, or they've not got persuasion to buy spice or get good cards. The problem now is that unload cards exist, and there's a fair few of them. And if you're against someone who's got Tested Humanity, and you've got a couple of unload cards in your deck, you don't care. Play it. It's almost like it can be a benefit to you sometimes if they play Tested Humanity and force you to discard it. You could, discard your Freighter Fleet and get the buff. They could discard your Water Peddler, and suddenly you've got access to Research Station when you didn't beforehand, and you can get them for someone else. Even Boundless Ambition, and just snipe like a big massive card that came out on the Imperium row in the last round. No one could buy it, and suddenly yoink, that's mine. 5 persuasion is huge. For a power play, for a Stilgar, Fufir. If you've got Spaceport, put it on top of your deck. Suddenly you can draw the card, and it's just like, so you got to be a little bit careful with Tested Humanity. Like intrinsically, it's good, but you have to be wary of your opponents. You've got to be paying attention to the game. If you've got opponents that have got like a few unload cards going on, you've got to be, especially Treachery as well. Treachery is the massive counter to Tested Humanity. They just suddenly throw in 2 troops, free of charge. So you've got to be a little careful how you play this. But if that isn't happening, getting discard cards can't be bad.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I mean, there are only 10 unload cards in the game. We're talking about synergies, right? Where you have to kind of like get all these things together to make them work for your unload cards. It's not that common that there are going to be enough unload cards in the game where this card is bad. I have had the situation where, someone plays Test of Humanity and I do end up discarding like a Water Peddler. That's wonderful. Please do that more. But it's easy to, I think, maybe get a little afraid that this card's value goes down because you help out one person, whereas you hurt the other 2 players. And I think generally speaking, the amount of times where everyone else has an unload card in their hand and you play Test of Humanity is very low. I also want to say that this card cannot be stopped if you play it as a last action, meaning they are going to lose a troop in combat. That is insane. Because if everyone's revealed and you play Test of Humanity, they must lose a card or a troop in combat. That is
Yeah,
a massive play.
yeah, and it's
So
not it's not retreated. That's straight gone.
it's straight gone.
Out
Yeah.
of the game.
Yeah. So I think Test of
Yeah.
Humanity, it's funny because, the Test of Humanity has to do with the box, right? That Paul puts his hand in. It's like you can't withdraw your hand or you die. In this, if you've already played all your hand, you lose a troop. There's kind of a nice little
It's
flavor
thematically
thing going on there. Okay, yeah, I like it.
Points for theme.
Points for theme. Oh, this game gets so many points for theme. People always say it's like themeless, but absolutely not. So Test of Humanity, I love this card. It buys for 2. It has decent access. I love Bene Gesserit access. I love Lands Red access. It's the only thing I can say about it. Yeah, is it could be a bad idea to buy this card if other people are buying a bunch of unload cards, for sure. Just be aware of that.
Just a little acknowledgement of the game here. We
play it
should
late.
probably make it. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, no, I'm saying just play it late. If you're worried, go to Mentat and go last. Like it's.
Yeah, I guess that's not a bad show. I think we should probably make a special note and mention of Tessie Humanity and Mother Mahayam.
It's
It would
insane.
feel wrong not to mention about this combination.
Yeah.
And how potentially horrendously cruel that can be. Forcing people to discard 3 cards. That's pretty painful, That's pretty crippling. I have seen people do that, and people just run out of cards and they start agent turns.
Yeah.
Like, it is. There's pretty much nothing else in the game that can do that, like, at all. So, there's got to be points to that there.
Duncan Loyal Blade at 38. We all have them about the same. I have them at 39. Patience at 40 and 47 for BlackShadow. I think this is all pretty reasonable. Everyone's kind of in agreement on this card.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. I'm not the biggest fan of Duncan Loyal Blade. I think it's kind of one of those cards where it's maybe as powerful for the threat of what it can do as much as what it actually does, which of course is its trash ability of deploying and retreating any number of troops to or from your garrison. Obviously, that's pretty powerful. Observant players will know that you've got it, and they will keep an eye out for it, and obviously, when you start garrisoning up later on, they'll know that it's coming at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But you can still, obviously, it's up to you kind of a little bit when you want to use it. The problem is that, and even if you get it early game, like, using it with, say, going Fremen, and the fact you get the troop extra is definitely fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's a decent agent action. It's all about, like, the threat of trashing this. I think that's where the values comes in. It requires a little bit of cunning on your part to kind of, even like mid-game, maybe try and make them think you're going to do it and then don't. Or even just, like, out of nowhere, like, play it a little bit early and take, like, a combat that someone's kind of banking on. Like, this to, like, steal a connections battle, the battle that gives you, like, the 2 influence points in the 2 tracks you decide, and just steal that from out of somewhere can be really crippling to them if they like using that to try and secure alliances. That can be a real nasty way to, like, pinch alliances from people.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be a little bit crafty with this card here, but there's definitely, like, there are spots where it's huge. But just using this purely as, like, oh, it's the end of the game, we're just going to stack a garrison up and use it as a rapid mobilization, I don't actually think it's the best way to use this. I think that you could be a bit more clever with it.
Yeah, no, I mean the only thing I'd add is that it's interesting that this is the first card I think where all of us it's higher in the ranking than where all of us ranked it, just because of the way the averages work.
Yeah,
A little bit,
of
yeah, it's a little funky.
yeah. But no, I think what everything you guys said is interesting. Satellite Ban, which is the next card, is a far more interesting card to me. I'd like to hear you guys
That's
take
a lot
on
to
it.
look at.
Really,
Yes.
yeah, I'm really up in the air on Satellite Ban.
So me too. So BlackShadow, you have this one in your top 20 at 19.
I've got it way down at like 57. So I want to hear BlackShadow's argument.
So this card doesn't always work. I will accept that, but I think this card. Let's get the reveal of feature out the way first. I think this card's reveal ability is not very good. Like,
Agreed.
at all.
Agreed.
Like, if you got this card, you want to be using it as agents, almost 100% of the time. I can't really think of any real situation where you want to reveal it for 1 persuasion or to retreat 2 troops. Let's just get that out of the way. That is not very good, and I suppose it probably has to lose points there. I just think that this card's agent abilities are just so huge, potentially, for your game, it is like it's really hard to like go against it.
Mhm.
It's getting you to factions, which is always good because you want to hit factions to try and secure those alliances. The Spacing Guild and Fremen are usually two of the most competitive. So this is encouraging you to try and go there and get ahead on them, especially with the Fremen. This going to the Fremen is incredibly, incredibly powerful because of discarding a card for 1 spice and 1 water. That is enormous. That lets you go to Hardy Warriors and be water neutral. It can let you go to Steel Suit and pick up 2 water. So you can ambush a great flat out of nowhere. You could go research station. This card potentially has the ability to just like if you can trim your deck down a little bit and like use this every other turn. Especially with someone who can do a lot of card drawing, like Paul, who can draw a lot of cards and cycle through his deck very quickly, and discarding the card doesn't have the biggest impact on still buying decent cards. This is your resource generator, and just finding all that water just makes you be able to hit great flat all the time. You go highliner all the time. This card it has potential just to completely spiral out of control and make you almost unplayable, potentially. It doesn't
Unbeatable.
always do that. It doesn't always do that. But that can be the case. And also, if you compare this up with something else, like a couple of unload cards, this is a monster.
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
the last thing you said is the key.
Yeah. Getting it to work with the unload cards. Yeah. I tend to agree. I rate this pretty middle of the road here. It's like Spice Trader, Truthsayer, Satellite Ban. For me, they all have the same strengths and weaknesses. They have potential good upsides, but they also have the same problem of I need to find a way to synergize this card with something else I've got going on, which is why I've kind of rated them all together at like 49.50 to 51. And the Guild Chief Administrator as well. But all of these have unload synergies. Satellite Ban for me is a little worse than the Truthsayer because the Truthsayer drawing cards is a little bit better. The Spice Trader getting 2 spice is usually better than a spice and a water. Usually, not always. I will agree with you. I think this card is better with Paul than it is with some of the other characters in the game because or Ilban even, someone who can draw lots of cards. Possibly even Ariana. This might be a really great Ariana card. Gives you water. I mean, gives you the ability to go back and mine more. Potentially very strong. My problems with it is that the access it gives you is so... It seems like it's good, but then you draw the card and you're like, I don't want to go to Fremen. Fremen's clogged up. Or I don't have enough spice to go to Highliner. And I've been in situations where that happens a lot, where this card is just unplayable because all the cards or all the spaces that I wanted are all clogged up. But I will give you that. I think it is a potentially strong resource generating card that I've just never really gotten to work on the level I've wanted it to work. It seems on paper very strong. That's the thing for me.
I do accept you probably need either someone who can draw a lot of cards or you need invasion ships. Invasion ships makes this card go up so much because then you just can't be blocked. You are discarding potentially 2 cards along with playing this, so you've got to be a little cautious about that. That is something you've got to be wary of potentially, but just the fact that especially as an aggressive player, like this in the Beast hand, for example, I can just go Hardy Warriors and be water neutral.
Yeah,
that's good. That is very, very scary for a lot of people, and it makes you hard to play against.
What do you think, Patience?
I think let's talk about Sea Trevor Mother. Another card that we just just right above all of our rankings except for I think BlackShadow has it.
Wow, we have it at the same. 37.
Yeah, the same. I've got it a little bit down, Sea Trevor Mother.
Yeah, tell us about that because we're both right here.
Yeah, tell us about why you don't like it.
I probably so. I mean, I don't think I'm not gonna say this card is bad at all by any stretch of imagination. I just don't think it's as good as it used to be. I think has gone down a little bit since its expansion. I think now it's more used for its reveal effect as much as anything else. Whereas in the base game, it was like both effects felt really good. Now just the card trash doesn't feel too great. It feels like Siege, you probably need to do a little bit more of it, really. So it's all
Hmm.
about like getting hold of the reveal effect, which of course you can't always guarantee is going to work out. You know, sometimes you just don't draw your hands. You know, and this is a great late card game because you by then you could have filled your deck with Fremen cards, you know, with liaisons and such, and you're gonna buy spice at this. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
But I do think like the early to mid game, this card is a little cumbersome. I suppose the argument would be, well, you just use it for the Asian effects to trash the cards down you don't want to use it later on, and that's probably true. But then you're not getting like it can be a little tricky to use sometimes. Like when it works off, like it's great, and you could buy spice must flows fairly effortlessly sometimes. But I don't think it's as good as it used to be.
I think what I like about it is basically what you said. It's a switch hitter. Early game, it's faction access, it's trashing cards, it's thinning my deck, which I think I value more than you do. And then late game, switch it up. It's not hard to get a Fremen bond going with a couple Fremens in your deck, other Fremens, and then yeah, it's like so it switch hits. It
Yeah.
Yeah,
it performs two really important purposes for me.
I
Thinning my
wouldn't be
deck, getting
disappointed
or
getting it.
three, I guess. What's that, sorry?
I wouldn't be disappointed getting this in my hand. You know, like it's there to grab for, and there's I'd be like, yeah, I'm totally fine with picking up Seat Driver Mother. But I don't think this card is as good as it used to be. And I just feel like the Asian effect, like it's totally fine getting the card trash, especially for me because I don't do it enough, admittedly. But it feels, I don't want to say underwhelming now. It's just there's a lot of cards that can trash, and there's a lot of ways of trashing cards now or discarding cards. So just being able to do that, it can't be quite as valuable as it used to be.
I rate this. Yeah, I think this is a good card, and I agree with you guys. I don't have anything negative to say about it. I think that it's probably the second best Fremen Bond card, maybe the third best Fremen Bond card, third best, with like Liatkine, Sayadina, and then Siege. This is in the top three of those of the Bond cards for me, and I would love to have this in my deck any time. I usually have enough Fremen most of the time to get use out of it. Yeah, so I don't have anything bad to say about it. I like this card a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah. Throwing bombs never too difficult to trigger if you need to, because there's 9 liaisons sitting right there, and you can always grab a couple. And having a liaison in your deck is never really a bad thing. So
Okay, how about Appropriate? Now, Appropriate's one that Patience, you've had some conversations with people about. Um, so why don't you start here? Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, I I'm really you're right. There's been some debate about appropriate. And I guess I haven't really um been moved on it. The idea, like the big effect that everybody's excited about is of course the agent ability is that you can get a tech and you can use Solari to buy it instead of Spice. And hey, that's great. I guess I find it really niche. And to pay 5, then for that card, okay, you get a bonus bump on the shipping track when you buy it, so that's good. It's got green and yellow access, fairly limited. I think the saving grace of this card, like I would think this card was trash, but it does have 2 persuasion.
Yep.
Um, so that for me is good enough. And then it's never going to be a bad thing to be able to use that ability to if you're using it as a for its agent effect. I guess, maybe I've got it a little. Where do I have it? Like 50 something?
51, yeah.
Yeah, so I may have it a tiny, tiny bit low, but I don't know, man. There's maybe I can imagine moving it up maybe 5 or so spaces. There's a bunch of cards there that are above it that I like. I'm not going to move it. Yeah. Anyway, that's my take.
No, don't move it.
I
Yeah.
just find it
I
pretty
think
neat.
that's interesting because I think it shows that you value Solari more than just for tech, and you see it as more like I need to run low to the ground, get the things I need, and then move on with my game plan. I think, whereas Appropriate kind of like it does more of what you'd expect to be doing if you had the perfect engine already running. Like I guess it works best if you're already flush with cash and you've already got the things you need. Does that make sense? It's kind of like,
That's a good point. I almost always have both my Swordmaster and my High Council.
mhm.
And then Mentat once, twice, maybe three times in the game. Like I'm not, yeah, like I don't, unless there's something going on with whatever, bounty hunter, or I'm playing Yuna or whatever. There's not usually, it's not usually that I'm going to have a bunch more cash than that. So you're right about
Yeah.
that. That's part of the consideration for me.
I think appropriate is one of those cards that, like, if you've got a lead in the game, it can be a amazing way to just like increase that lead and get hold of stuff that you shouldn't really have any particular right to buy. The problem is, of course, is you have to have the Solari to pay for it, and Solari is a bit inconsistent. You are somewhat dependent on what the rewards are for combat. Like, if you get a guild bank raid early, obviously that makes appropriate look very, very juicy. But if a lot of the combats aren't really giving a lot of Solari, it can make it a bit tricky to use. The other issue, of course, is the fact you've got to have 2 influence of the Emperor in the first place, and that is its own stumbling block, because no one really wants to go there sometimes.
That's true.
Mhm.
That's a good
That
point.
is the big issue. Like, you get hold of the card, you're paying 5 influence for the smuggling bump, which is like, it's okay, I guess. You're not buying it. You shouldn't be buying it for the spacing bump. Like, that's just,
It's a
you can
bonus.
do better with 5. It's an addition. It's having the 2 influence of the Emperor, and you need to make sure you achieve that somehow. And typically, most people will get that 2 influence at some point in the game. But not everyone wants to do it first. They're going to focus potentially on other things. Like, it's pretty committing to just say, I'm just going to start hitting wealth every single time I can to pay for appropriate. You're kind of really potentially harming your early game, expecting to catch up later on, which there's absolutely no guarantee that's going to be the case. But when you do get this card rocking and rolling, it can be unbelievably destructive.
Yeah.
Letting you buy, you can buy, spend 8 Solari for a victory point. That's kind of insane. Obviously, combining this, if you got 2 influence and using this alongside interstellar shipping, is like completely absurd.
Yeah.
Because you can basically use this and buy pretty much any tech you want at any point. And that is unbelievably dangerous. You get all the invasion ships. Basically, you can go instead of shipping and get invasion ships basically for free. You can get hold of Holtzman for free. That is obviously incredibly dangerous. It's just getting the influence in the first place is a bit tricky.
Yeah.
And then obviously using it into a space is also a little dicey sometimes. But no, if you're ahead in the game and you pick this up and you can get this going, like, you can just steamroll a match with this and just buy all sorts of techs and just basically become unplayable. But coming from behind with this card is tricky because you need those resources in the first place, and you're probably behind because you don't have them. So
Yeah.
it does kind of scale a little bit.
There's a lot of counterplay to this card, which is one of the reasons I don't rate it higher. If you get this early, you run the risk of other people blocking wealth, and then you just won't get your appropriate to trigger. So, I mean, obviously it's a 2 persuasion, but it's like a blank agent card then, and that's bad. However, I think this is kind of like some of those other cards we were talking about, a little bit like the Ixian Engineer, where you need to get it at the right time, kind of like after things are going well for you, or you're kind of like you're going along and you've got some Emperor influence. Maybe you don't have like both of the Emperor influence, but you potentially could. It comes up in the row, and you happen to have access. You go Emperor, then you reveal and buy it, and no one else is even close. Either they decide to, deny it to you, or you get something beneficial to you. So I think in that case, it's I like this card. I think it's a fair kind of card that may be a little too fair at times, but then when it gets out of control, it really can. And I've seen it where someone goes to ship and drops the hammer or whatever, and then like buys 2 things in one turn, and turns out that they're, what do you call it, the one that gives you 4 swords for the High Council, restricted ordnance, and like and like the other combat one, or like
Artillery and whatnot.
I mean, you can just completely throttle people with this, and it's pretty insane. But things have to align. That's why it's not higher for me.
It's interesting that the things do have to align. The next card on our list here, Lanyarite, is like, first of all, they're almost ranked identically.
Yeah.
Same with the one above it. So all these ones are, and then we take some big leaps in the next couple after
Yes.
that. But this is also one where I think it's a little bit above where we all ranked at landing rights. Landing rights is like the opposite. It's such a straightforward card. Blue access, agent ability is a bump on the track. It's got two persuasion. That's all
Mm-hmm.
there is to it, right? It costs four, so it's a little bit more affordable than appropriate, say for example, but it's still like maybe a bit expensive for what it does. Like could be three. I like this card. Uh, I had it in my most recent game, and I didn't get to use it for its agent once, either because I was getting blocked out of the cities or because I just had more important things to do. So that kind of like reinforced my mediocre ranking of it, I would say.
I think that's
Yeah,
totally fair. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, as with several cards we've said beforehand, this in the hands of Helena is potentially
Nuts.
like really dangerous. If
Yeah.
there's a Helena in the game, if you can try and stop her from getting this, you probably should. If she brings it, there's just not a lot you can do about it. You just got to accept that that's happened. Of course, the whole big trick behind this is, of course, going to a city and cashing in the shipping to get troops in via interstellar shipping,
Yeah.
basically. That's the whole deal, to get in free troops, potentially four troops, potentially, or whatever else, and just throwing a load of troops in out of nowhere, which is harder to do than it used to be. That's the whole gimmick. But again, you
Yep.
are limited by the fact it can only go to cities. So it's a good candidate for dispatching as envoy or infiltration.
Yeah.
Definitely, it's a huge candidate for that. Like I once did landing rights to Highliner. That was pretty fun.
Yeah.
Gotta say that was a good moment. Had troop transports as well at the same time. That was pretty ridiculous. But yeah, it's that's what its gimmick is. It's a strong gimmick, and it's very good when you use it correctly. But the problem is as well, if people have got new landing rights, they will be always watching your spacing track like a hawk. And if you're sitting there on two bumps on the shipping, they will know this is coming. So
Mm.
it's pretty hard to like trick people with this and kind of catch them off guard. They're typically going to know that it's coming. There has to be points against it for that.
Yeah, I think this is just such a solid card. I know that it's limited where it can go. The shipping track trigger is just so powerful, and I think that shows the audience a little bit how we value shipping track. Like this just gives you a bump. That's
Yeah.
it. But the fact that that is super powerful and can be triggered at any time you play an agent, like that's potentially
Yeah.
combat winning.
It's a fascinating alternative because, of course, we talked about diversion, the intrigue early on. Send four troops and get a spacing bump, and well, I think we'd agree it's probably one of the weakest intrigues in the game.
Yeah.
And yet, it does in paper exactly the same thing. It's fascinating.
It's just a little bit more contingent on other things going right. I mean, this one's a little easier to pull off than that. But yeah, I don't know. I really think this is a great card. I like it a lot. I will take it highly.
This
Mainly,
never stays in the Imperium row for long.
no, I mean, so the way we were talking about when we started this, that some of the ways we're ranking our cards is how it compresses actions, and this is a card that compresses actions. A lot of the cards that we've been ranking have do that, but this is an action that you can usually only get in a couple of ways: smuggling, interstellar shipping, the aforementioned intrigue card, or one or two other places. So landing rights' value to me is that it substitutes for an extra trip to smuggling, and that basically says, well, I can do two things. I can take two actions in one action. I'm probably going to want to go there anyway. I'm probably going to want to trigger the smuggling anyway, once or twice a game probably. So this kind of cuts down on the amount of times I need to do that, making me just a bit more efficient. But I mean, it is limited. It is limited for sure. All
Full
right.
scale assault.
Full scale assault.
You're the highest ranker, CJ.
I am. Where is this in? Oh, wow. Black
All
Shadow has this
over
at
the place.
64.
Yeah, I have this very,
You
very
think this
low.
card? You basically just said this card is trash. This is just a light it on fire. You don't want it in your game.
No.
Uh,
So 64 might be a little harsh, but I do not like this card. I'll let you two talk about it first, and I'll count the points.
okay, fine. I'll go first because I'm at the top here, 26. This is probably the weakest of the 8-cost cards in the game. It has to be the weakest of the 8-cost cards in the game. The others are higher for me, but the fact that you can turn your dreadnoughts into an extra 3 power is very strong. It gives you 2 troops if you go to a blue space, or I suppose, what is it? It's an Emperor space. Is that what it is?
Emperor or city.
Or city, yeah. I mean, the city space is what you're using this for. You're rarely ever sending your full scale assault to the Emperor, unless if you do that, people should be thinking, oh, they have a rapid mobilization ready to go, because that's not a good play usually. I like this card a lot. I think the fact that it gives you a dreadnought for just buying it is the best way to get a dreadnought in the game. Like, I hate buying dreadnoughts, I really do. But if I can get one for just buying a card, I'll do that, So I think it gets a lot of props from me for that reason.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think what you hit the nail on the head. Like, it is the weakest of the really expensive cards and cost 8 persuasion. But it's also a really strong combat card. Yeah, the 2 troops are decent, but it's really about the reveal.
Yeah.
And about, like you said, getting the dreadnought when you purchase it. So you're building in already one of those big bonuses. For me, it's the fact that you're getting the thing that saves this card, because I'm not, and I'm really going to want to hear
Persuasion.
BlackShadow's take BlackShadow's take as a more combat centric guy. For me, the saving grace is that it has the 2 persuasion, so it gets me both worlds. Like, I'm getting these big combat benefits for the dreadnought, 3 swords per dreadnought, plus I'm getting the 2 persuasion at the same time. That's what's making this card, and also that I got the dreadnought when I bought the card. Yeah, BlackShadow, tear it apart, man.
I'm gonna try. I mean, as you mentioned, obviously for 8 costs, like it's the weakest of the 3. Now, to be fair, that's not necessarily fair, because its 2 competitions are like Quiz at Haderach and
Chom.
whatever the other one. Is that just those 2?
Chom, yeah.
And Chom Delegate, which Chom Delegate I've also rated like reasonably, but directorship even, but not crazy high. I'll talk about that when we get there. Now,
this is
obviously,
just...
again, I'm a fighter normally, so in theory this should appeal to me. The problem I've got is that 8 persuasion is difficult to get to start with. And that is an issue. And the odds are, if you're going combat heavy, you may not even have a particularly high persuasion deck in the first place. You may not even end up picking this up. So there's inherently a potential problem. If you can get this card early, and you end up deciding to like trash like your convincing arguments and stuff and just go full Ooga Booga mode, then okay, I guess fine. But there are issues with this card. I don't think it's worth 8 value.
That's fair.
I just don't. I just don't think if this was like, say, a 6 coster,
well,
maybe a 7.
Pretty good at 7. Yeah, I think 7 would have been right.
7 probably. I think 8 is just a little bit overpriced. When you think that you could literally have 1 extra persuasion point, and you just get a victory point, guaranteed. It's done. It's in the bank, and no one can do anything about that. This card requires you to buy it, to then use it, set it up with, say, double dreadnoughts. You still got to find the other one to get the max use out of this. Which means you've still got to buy a dreadnought, or get lucky with like persuasion, intrigue, or something for that, and find a way to get the second dreadnought. Because no one wants to go to dreadnought spaces because they're just not that good at the moment, and that is just a sad reality. Because I wish they were better, but at the moment they're just not quite at the races. I think more often than not.
I am seeing them more. I am seeing them played more.
People are starting to explore them more, which I'm glad to see. People are starting to delve into a little bit more, and I've always felt that they can be decent, but I don't know if they're quite there compared to the other things you can do. My other issue with this is that like the reveal effect for the dreadnoughts is in theory really good, but if you're paying attention, you know this is coming. And if you're paying attention to like people's decks, which you should really be if you're playing at sort of like in a higher level, you're kind of keeping an eye on what people have been playing and what they haven't. You can more often than not kind of see when this card is coming, and you can adjust your own play for it and think, right, I'm pretty sure this is coming because like he's got, say, a 12 card deck. He didn't show it in his first hand, so he's probably going to get his second one. So I know I've got to put in a little bit more emphasis on the fight to counter it. So I think that like this card's surprise ability doesn't always get there. It does have 2 persuasion with its reveal, which I admittedly completely forgot. So it probably gets some points that I just completely legitimately forgot that was the case.
Well, to be fair, it's buried beneath a bunch of text. You really can't see it on the card.
It is easy to miss. And as we mentioned, it has Emperor spaces, but you really don't. It's all about getting used to the cities, which means, of course, that it's more useful to some people than others. Obviously, Helena getting hold of this is potentially pretty scary because she can throw in 3 troops minimum whenever she wants, including like the dreadnought, of course, that is going to be in the garrison because she has one because she got it with this. So that means she can visit a city with this card whenever she wants and throw 9 strength into the combat minimum. That's pretty intimidating. But if I had 8 persuasion, there's so many more things I'd want to buy for 8 persuasion, and you think you'd get hold of there's so many great cards you can get for 3 and 4 costs. I could get like Web of Power and In the Shadows for like 6. I could get, there's just so much you could do. Fufia for 5, and get like I don't know, like a Guild Bankers or something. Shifting Allegiance. There's so many good cards in the game that cost 3 or 4 persuasion. This feels a little bit more like I went for Spice Must Flow, missed out on this, so I'll take Full Scale Assault because there. I think, and it's I have never played a game where I'm like, right, I'm gonna try and get 8 persuasion to get Full Scale Assault. I've never done that in my entire life. Maybe that's me. Maybe that's my fault. Perhaps. But this just feels like a Spice Must Flow loser buy.
That's fair. Actually, that's a good point because the last game I did buy this, I could have bought Spice Must Flow and then lost the game, so it must be true.
There you go. Then you're converted, man.